Welcome to Stories of a C O podcast. As you may have known before, if you've watched our other ones, the C O enables us to talk to anybody that's in part of the C-suite. And today we're delighted to be joined by Ellie Armour, who is the Chief People Officer at Speedy Hire. Ellie, I will come to you in a second so you can introduce yourself. But just so people are aware, my name's James Lambert. I'm a director at Oliver Sanderson, and my co-host today is Natasha Makajani. She is the CEO and founder of Oliver Sanderson. And Oliver Sanderson was founded 14 years ago. And we've set up this podcast to interview people like Ellie so we can hear their inspirational stories. So before we get into Ellie's story, Ellie, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Delighted to join you both today. So I am Ellie Armour. I'm the Chief People Officer from Speedy Hire. I've been with the business about 5 years, but I've been working within the people and HR space for 35 years, for quite some time, across multiple industries. So I've had the pleasure of enjoying hospitality, engineering, logistics, retail, and now more recently I've got nearly everything bar the hospitality under one roof here at Speedy Hire, which is great, which was the reason why I joined. I have 3 boys. 2 are from my previous marriage, Ryan and Nathan. And then Ethan is my stepson. So I'm always busy doing stuff with the boys. And in fact, today is Nathan's 21st birthday. So in the background, there's all sorts of things going on. So so I kind of keep myself busy and recharge myself down at a caravan that I have in Norfolk. And that's where I like to spend my time, at the seaside.
Lovely. And I'm with you on the caravan piece. I love going to the seaside, and more tenting than caravanning now. But yeah, it's such a great way to de-stress. So look, I'm gonna pretend now that I'm a mathematician that says you've been in A for 35 years. That means that you must have actually done your GCSEs at the point when it was the first round of the GCSEs, moving from O levels to GCSEs. I joke with that one, Ellie, but I know that there's a story that sits behind this. You know, often with big changes that happen wherever they are, actually, whether it be work, whether it be home, whether it be life, it doesn't really matter. But you are actually part of that first big change, moving from what was the old O levels to the new GCSEs that most people know about. And I think I'd love to start to take you right back to those days, because I know there's a story associated to that. That's probably quite an interesting one to start this discussion that we're going to have around your inspirational journey through your career. So do you want to take us back and explain what that was?
Yeah, so I have to go back with the old memory. But so I was 15, about to choose my options. And back in those days, everyone had been talking about O levels all the way through. And as a 15-year-old, I hadn't taken a lot of notice really over what was going on in terms of education and changing exams. I think my mum and dad were more worried than I was, but I didn't really take any notice. At the end of the day, an exam was going to be an exam. However, there was quite a big change fundamentally, the way in which the scoring and the grading was going to happen. And the big change was there was going to be a big proportion of the work was going to be assessed in terms of project work and coursework during the year, with less weighting on exams, which for me personally was quite tricky, because I was quite good at being able to revise, cram everything in, and then be able to churn it all out for an exam, unlike a lot of my friends at the time. So I was a little bit nervous about that. However, I was quite a studious person. Some of my friends at school used to call me a boffin. I had to work hard at it. It wasn't natural, but I really enjoyed school. So I worked extra hard. I chose my options. And I worked really hard on the coursework. It really paid off in things like art. However, during the journey into the GCSE exam year, I got glandular fever. So, of course, when you have an extended period out of school, when there is so much on coursework and assessment, and of course, because we hadn't got any kind of exam test papers like they had for the O level, it was a troublesome time for me. I was really worried, and having gone from being, I guess, top of the class in the top sort of 3 or 4, I then struggled when I came back after having glandular fever. So I went straight into the exam period, and although there was a medical certificate that went in to say that I'd been off for a period of time and therefore I'd missed all the preparation, which had been quite different from what had been prepared in previous years, it did make a dent on my results. I mean, I still got good results. I got a mixture of A's, B's and C's. I got 1D, which was in physics, so I wasn't very good scientifically, and I never have been since then. But all the rest, I managed to get in the A to C grades, which was fantastic. But I guess the biggest hurdle then after that, so if you put behind you the GCSEs, education realised there was a big gap between the GCSE course content and the O-level. And then as I chose my A-levels, there was this kind of, already an A-level was hard enough, but then having to do gap in respect of having been off for 3 months, then cover the gap of the O-level, and then go into A-levels. The only thing I can say is I didn't get anywhere near where I thought I would in terms of my A-level results. And I thought that was the end of the world. I didn't think I'd be able to do my degree. My parents had gone away on holiday. It's a bit of a standing joke. My dad had said to me, if you fail, you need to go and get a job. A proper job. And at the time I was working part-time for Mothercare, for those people that remember Mothercare. And I worked for a general manager, a female, who was like really strict, and she really ran a tight ship. And I was down in the stockroom. I'd gotten my results. I'd rung my parents. I'd failed. I'd got E, a U, and a fail altogether. So that's pretty dramatic from really being on probably for C or B grade. So there was no way I was going to be able to do the degree that I wanted. So it was the end of my world. So I went into work and I was just cried my eyes out all morning down in the stockroom. General manager called me up to her office. She sort of demanded to know what was going on and why I was in such a mess. Not in a kind and pathetic way, but like, what is wrong with you, girl? And I explained that I'd failed my A-levels, and my dad said I'd need to get a proper job. And she said, well, you need to pull your socks up. This is a proper job. Get back downstairs and get on with it. So from that point, actually, as mean as she was, it did spark me into thinking, right, I do need to get on with my life. And what am I going to do? And then I guess it was, okay, well, where do I go from here? I didn't get the results I wanted. I was fortunate. Birmingham rang me to say, we can see you didn't get the results, but you can go through clearing and you can do an HND and convert it into a degree. So that's what I did instead. So my world opened up a different door. I wasn't going to Portsmouth anymore, but I went to Birmingham, and the world took a different direction.
Wow. And look, there's going to be potentially people in the same shoes, having gone through the summer and just finishing GCSE. So to all those that might be watching it, that might have had that experience, testament to hard work and where you can get to. So Natasha, I know you're going to take over, so over to you.
So Ellie, I had the pleasure of meeting you. I think I was 26 at Michael Page, and you actually inspired me. So what my journey here today is actually because I've been inspired by you as one of my mentors and somebody that I've always looked up to. And so listening to your story of the fact that you didn't pass and then you took the HND route and then you actually went to Birmingham and where you are today in the C-suite, it'd be really, great to know a bit more, because actually you found your niche in HR. And in that niche, to me, I remember back in the day, you were one of the youngest HR directors in the UK to get to where you were at DHL and all the brands that you've gone to. And I've seen you grow over the years. So that's a massive achievement. So tell us, how did you balance developing your career as a CPO over the years and being one of the youngest HR directors in the UK, and then also telling us about the fact that you were a single mum whilst you achieved all these things? So give us a bit about that.
Well, there's a lot of questions there. So I think, I was one of the youngest personnel managers in Tesco, which was probably the beginning of the foundations of my career in HR. I'd worked for Forte before that, and I'd kind of got a taste of HR and personnel as it was back in those days through my work placement. So that had been my first door of, and I'd helped interview somebody, I'd helped do their training, and I thought I really enjoyed this. So I really then focused when I went back to university, having done the work placement, I thought, right, I'm really going to focus on the subjects that will help me perhaps get into a career within HR. Once I moved into Forte, they gave me kind of I was very, very junior, but very much supported me in that space. Then across into and at Tesco, I was a personnel manager. I was part of a new regime of personnel managers. So Tesco had always recruited internally, traditionally from the coffee shops and from the deli counters. They were sort of naturally more empathetic, sort of people-focused section managers that then moved into personnel manager roles. I was part of a regime that was like the personnel manager's door is going to be locked. The personnel manager is going to be very operational on the shop floor, going to really understand the business, understand talent, what learning and development requirements there are, want them to understand all of the KPIs within the store, be a duty manager of the store, understand the responsibilities towards the customer and towards the P&L of the business. So I guess Tesco really shapes me in respect to being a very operationally focused HR person and somebody that needed to understand the business and how you're going to grow a business. So those were my early days of thinking, right, I already knew I wasn't a traditional personnel person. I kind of just swam in a completely different lane, I guess. And then during my career at Tesco, I first got a notice through an assessment centre to say you could be more than a personnel manager, you could be a regional manager. But what we'd like you to do first of all is open a new store. So I went and opened a brand new Tesco store in Riverhead in Sevenoaks in Kent, which was absolutely brilliant. And that got me kind of an audience with Terry Leahy and all sorts of really sort of, board level directors and executives. And talking to them, I thought, they're just like you and me. These aren't people that speak a highfalutin language or have got an intellect far beyond mine. These are people that just want to do the right thing for the customer, that want to grow a business. And I guess at that sort of young age of 23, I was thinking, well, like maybe I could do that. Whilst I didn't have this massive ambition to be a chief people officer, I always wanted to be the best that I could be in the role that I was. But once I got to being the best that I could be, there was always a bit of space for something more. And then I was in this sort of time where I was a personnel manager of a great big new store opening. I'd been identified to be a regional development manager. There wasn't a vacancy at that point in time. There was a move around of some of the RDMs as they were known back then. And I'd been married a couple of years. We were starting to talk about family. So my husband then and I decided that I would take a bit of time out to go and have a baby. So, which is what I did. And when I say a bit of time, again, we're going back. So my eldest son will be 26 this year. Back then I was the main breadwinner. And I was on a good career trajectory. I really enjoyed my job. I knew when I was off on maternity leave that I wasn't like all the other mums at the school gates and all of that. I was really missing being at work and having my brain stretched in that way. So I guess I ended up only taking 4 months off and went through that horrible time of like, oh, am I doing the right thing? You to get back to work because we, need to be able to carry on paying the mortgage. But I also want to get back because I want to enjoy my career. I want to do the right thing by Ryan as well. So I did take the choice to put Ryan into nursery, which was really difficult at 4 months old. And I've still got the photo today of that they sent me just like an hour after I'd left to say, he's absolutely fine. You don't need to worry. He's already loving it here. So I went through that pain like a lot of mums do, and you sort of drive away from the nursery of the heartache. And then I landed back into work and 8 hours went like that. And then it was like, oh, I need to get back to the nursery to pick Ryan up. And I guess that's how I took to balancing work and children and home and being a wife, was because I went and I did my job and I kind of managed to decompartmentalize, I suppose. And I kind of the job was in one box. Ryan was at nursery, and then I'd come home. I'd be mum, I'd be wife, I'd be housekeeper, etc. So, and because I worked in retail, I used to have a day off in the week. I used to have to work one Sunday in the month, but my husband then used to work in retail as well, so we'd balance it off. He'd have a different day off in the week, so that's how we kind of managed it, and a bit with parents supporting on the weekends that I needed to work. So it was really tough. And then going through my career, Natasha, I was always spinning plates. I was always juggling. I was always very good at making friendships, you know, whether it be with mums at nursery, mums at school, once Ryan went to school. When I had Nathan, my second child, I literally timed it, and I was very lucky. I need to fall pregnant here so I can be off to settle Ryan into school. So there's a 5-year gap between my children, and that was purposeful. So I could settle one into school, be off for maternity leave with the other, and then we went again. And then after that, my husband took a career break for 6 months so that he could balance the childcare while I went back to work and carried on with my career. And then, unfortunately, you know, I did go through the pain of a divorce, and then became a single mum. And then I was really reliant on family, on friendships, and giving as good as I could as well. So whereas I couldn't necessarily help during the week, friends, you know, I'd be the mum that had everybody over on the weekend, or I'd everybody over on an evening if there was something that people needed to go to. So you find a way of being able to pay back, don't you, or pay forward. So I used to do that a lot. But yeah, I mean, in fact, if you have a look at our Speedy Facebook page, there's a little reel on there of Nathan. So last year, I think it was, for the International Women's Day, they wanted to interview me about how did I manage, you know, being a mom, etc. A bit like your question. And I thought, well, rather than ask me, you know, how I did it and whether it was successful or not, why don't you ask one of my children? So they interviewed Nathan. And he talks on there about, we had to get out of bed really early, and we had like breakfast at all mum's friends' houses. But, we used to go on great holidays, and we never went, without. And actually mum always makes up for it. She always tidies up my bedroom, and she does this and she does that because, she's known we've had to give up stuff, but instead we've had other things. So yeah, listen, it wasn't perfect at all for me, for them, for the family, but we got there, and everybody's been successful off the back of it in the end. So I don't think anybody got too damaged along the way.
Wow, Ellie, that's really inspiring. And what's really interesting is that along the way you've built this amazing career. Did you ever, for any mums out there or any parents out there that may be single parents that want to go up the ladder, did you ever have any self-doubt that, can I actually balance this between the two? Because it's a pretty amazing story what you're telling us.
Well, yeah, you have to make sacrifices and you have to make choices. So, as an example, when I was working at DHL, which is obviously where I met you, Tash, I realistically, if I wanted my career to go any further than it was, I needed to be more international. And whilst my last role there was in looking after all of the central functions across EMEA, I had to go to like different meetings, maybe once a month abroad. But taking the next level up, so being a successor to my boss, I would literally need to have been able to, drop a hat, maybe spend a week in Africa or go and spend, a week in Europe somewhere. And the boys at that time were sort of, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 13 and going on from there during my years at DHL. And that was impossible. So there were times where you think, I'm not going to be able to go all the way where I might have the capability because of the context of the job and what the requirements would be. But instead took a choice to move to Fountains, to a facilities business, where actually I was back UK with a little bit in America that I used to look after, but predominantly in the UK. And therefore I was still able to take that next step to being a group HRD in my own right, but without the European travel. And then when I left there and went to SPE, I was back into the international environment, but the boys were much older. And also I had a different infrastructure around me. So then I was able to go to the meetings, in Paris or Belgium or wherever it might be. But again, it was probably back to once a month. It wasn't needing to go and spend a week or anything like that. But then having said that, you then get to a point in time where you say, well, I'm enjoying all of this international work, but actually I still had a group HRD that was based out in France. So I still wasn't the absolute number one. So it was really nice to join Speedy, then to become the chief people officer, where I am in the number one role. It is in the PLC space, which I'd kind of, although I'd worked in PLCs, I hadn't been in a senior role in the PLC world. So this kind of role at Speedy Hire, for me is like my last role in a big C-suite role, because it's in the PLC environment. It's UK and Ireland centric, which is great. And I get the opportunity to work with some really kind of strategic minds that are wanting to grow a business, that are really kind of centered around people, around the customer. And I've been able to do that now with the boys now at sort of 26, 21 and 19. So it works really well. So I think you have to make those sacrifices along the way, whether they be, I can't actually take that next step now into that role because I can't balance that with family, or you say, well, actually you sit down with the family and say, look, I've got this opportunity, but this is what it's going to mean. How do we all feel about it? So actually making sure the family involved in some of the decisions you make are really important. And I don't just mean the immediate family, it could mean the friends and the wider extended family that are going to support you. So, and I've had a mix of that over the years. It's difficult, but I always think that things happen for a reason and there's fate. So even though you might turn something down, something else then presents itself. And I think the most important thing is, whilst you might be an ambitious person, is not to get hung up on, right, that's the role, that's where I'm going. Even if it's in the company you're in, I am going to be the CPO or I am going to be the CEO. Actually, it might not be the right timing or the right opportunity for you to do that job, but it might be the right timing opportunity for another job that you haven't considered at all. And I guess that's where it really worked for me, and that's how my career took the steps that it did. I took those chances.
That's fantastic. So Ellie, one of your every job has its challenges, and one of your roles had a fairly significant one, joining a business that was doing well, was growing, was expanding, and overnight things happened. What was it, and how did you manage the people and yourself in that particular role?
So I'd worked for Forte, for Tesco, for DHL, so massive companies, and I'd never really realised how well wrapped in cotton wool I was from a job security point of view. It never even crossed my mind, about companies or roles becoming at risk. It just never crossed my path at all. So when I got headhunted from DHL, and this was one of those chances that I took, I couldn't work my way up without that international time abroad. So I took a role with a company, as it was back then called Connaught, that then later became Fountains. And Connaught were the darlings of the FTSE 250. So I guess, listen, I hadn't done loads of research into whether they were a really secure company to work for. I was never one of those people. It was always about the role for me and the opportunity and the person I'd be working for and what the objectives were. So I kind of joined the darlings of the FTSE 250. And they were a great business, and it was made up of three divisions: a compliance division, a partnerships division, and an environmental division. And I joined as the HRD for the environmental division, and it was fantastic. We had a great team, great ambition, and whilst we were part of the Connaught Group, each of the divisions, I guess, ran quite autonomously with their own chief executive and their own sort of little senior leadership team or board. So I joined in I want to say the March, and then I think it was June and July were the first and second profit warnings. And I was like, I've never experienced this sort of stuff before. And there were holes that were emerging in the finances of the mothership. And and by September, we were then told that the business was going to be taken into administration. So the administrators were coming in. However, when they'd kind of looked at all of the books, so to speak, the partnerships business was where the big hole was, but the environmental division and the compliance division were both profitable parts of the company. So we were called in, and when I say we, myself, the CEO, so I was HRD, the CEO and the chief finance officer were called in to basically present in front of the banks as to whether our divisions could be separated from the wider Connaught business within a very short period of time, which would be basically taking everything out of the head office down in Exeter. So everything from sales ledger to payroll, every single head office function would need to be separated out, and you'd need to set something up separately to be able to run the environmental division as an ongoing business in its own right. And could that be done? So we were locked in a room for pretty much, I think, 12 hours to pull together the plan. So like a whole day. I think I came straight back. My first day back from holiday, meet us in London, and we were locked in a room. We're all separate, the partnerships, the compliance and the environment, all in separate rooms in this lawyer's office. And we put together a plan, and some of it we knew we could do. Some of it we didn't know whether we could definitely do, but we thought we'd give it a good bash. And also there were other people that we were going to be presenting to would know whether those things were viable or not. So yeah, we presented to the banks, and they said, right, we're going to set you up as an ongoing, set you up as a business. You've got, I think we had 12 weeks all in all to separate ourselves. We had 6 weeks to get the payroll out and 12 weeks to get everything out in its entirety. Set up a new head office in Banbury for the environmental business that was then renamed Fountains, and then set sail again. So I've never done anything like that. It's not a job you would apply for either. Why don't you apply to join a job that's going into administration, carve it out, set up a brand new business, and then 12 months into that business, then sell that business to the OCS group, which is what we did, and safeguarded 2,300 people's jobs. And then a further 400 people who then got taken on, the contracts were then taken on by Biffa. So what was great was, we had 2,700 people in Fountains that potentially were going to lose their jobs, as did all the partnerships people. But in fact, they all had jobs on an ongoing basis with Fountains for another year. And then we were able to sell on, which was fantastic. But at the time, I lived on my nerves. We were on 6 a.m. calls, 6 p.m. calls, 11 p.m. calls. This has been switched off. That's happened. Oh my God, what are we going to do? So this was just constant firefighting. But when I look back, it's probably the time I learned most, and where I guess I got most of my resilience from as well as a leader, because you just have to think on your feet, and also becoming a more rounded business leader. Tesco started it and really helped me along the way, but that role really helped me understand all the functions of a business, not just my own space. Yeah.
And just out of interest, would you do something like that again, Ellie? Now looking back at...
Not in my 50s, Tash. Yeah, I want to have a nice, easy life now, Tash. I wouldn't apply for it, but if something like that was to happen, I know I'd back myself to be able to get through it, and know that any senior team would be able to get through it as long as you pull together as a team, and you just kind of, you just have to use your common sense and use the specialists that are around you, because there's plenty of people that you can call upon.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously you must have had some sleepless nights, but I remember working with you during that time, and I think you did an amazing job, and that's why you're here now in your current role and doing so well. But just, Ellie, anything that you would like to tell us before I hand you over to James for the next part of the podcast? Anything you think that we haven't covered, your career, that you think stands out that we should be talking about?
Standout moments in my career. I think it just comes back to the most job satisfaction comes from, for me, certainly in this space, seeing other people achieve, what they set out to do in terms of their career. So whether that's, getting a qualification that they really wanted, whether that's getting a job they really wanted, whether that's inside of the business, i.e. with the business that I've been working, or whether or not it's the success that they've then been able to have outside of the business, but we've helped them along the way. We've been part of that journey. For me, that's the bit that I enjoy most about the job, and as a leader, is seeing the success of others. So yes, seeing the business grow and shareholders obviously make money, but there's this big bit for me, which is about all of the people that are working in the businesses that I work with, seeing them be successful. So I think standout points for me have always been, I guess, two main examples. One, back at my time in SPE, where an MD that I was working with on the senior leadership team then became my boss. So, i.e., developing my own boss. So actually, that's the ultimate. When you've developed people to be successful in their careers, and then you develop somebody that then becomes your boss and becomes a CEO. That for me felt like, wow, I've really made it. I've actually developed a CEO. And then when I came across to Speedy, I worked with the chief operating officer, as was then Dan Evans, and for a couple of years, and then he became my boss too. So I guess my two standout achievements are to achieve that for people that have sat alongside me as a peer and have then become the boss, because part of their journey isn't always just about the competence and the confidence. It's about somebody really having their back and saying, look, you can do this. And that's part of because you can imagine when you actually become the ultimate leader of the business, the person that is taking the full accountability, you sometimes do have confidence crisis from time to time, and actually when you're putting yourself out there to go for a role, when you're a senior exec, to be unsuccessful if you're in a business and then there's a role up here, would not feel great. So you've got to feel like, well, I'm really going to get this job, I'm going to get it. So working with Dan to give him that confidence, and I knew he was the right leader for Speedy. It was fantastic that he put himself in the ring for it, and he got the job, and he's a very successful and fantastic leader. And before that, working with Rob Goodhue, again, he was like, what, me? Why would I go from MD to CEO? Because you've got the right nature, the right style, the right passion and inspiration, the business, you've been an engineer, you're really commercial. Yeah, so I think for me, seeing those two be successful is the icing on the cake. So and I think for anyone out there, is what is your icing on the cake? And sometimes you don't know it until it actually, gets piped on for you. So, So for me, it's, enjoy everything and walk through every door that's open. That's for sure.
That's really special. I'm going to hand over to James now to take over.
So you mentioned a couple of bits there, Ellie. As one of my questions, my final question to you was going to be, you've had a hugely successful career. You've talked through that. You've had some setbacks. You've had to sacrifice, as you've talked about. You've just said a piece of advice there for people is, what is your icing on the cake? When you reflect back over your career, though, and we think about who's listening to this podcast, and it could be anybody who's maybe right back in their early career, just finishing school, not really sure what to do, all the way through to budding CPOs, CEOs of the future. What advice, 2-3 bits of advice would you give people that you've learned along the way that's really helped you, that could help them to develop and to grow?
There's one bit which was a real downside in my career, which was when somebody else didn't think I had the capability of doing a role. And I was, for the first time, I guess, in my whole journey, if I think about education and work, I was coming up against a real blocker. And I thought to myself, well, this person doesn't think I can do that job. And are basically telling me that there are showstoppers. I thought to myself, well, it wasn't necessarily that I really wanted to do that job. I just thought, well, this showstopper could be a showstopper in other jobs and other opportunities. And I didn't agree with the feedback that I'd been given. And it's really tricky because, feedback is a gift, isn't it? So you can choose to take it and do something with it. You can choose to, ignore it and just put it to the back of the cupboard. Or you can package it up and feed it, pass it on to somebody else. And in this instance, I didn't agree with it, but I wasn't prepared to put it to the back of the cupboard. I wanted to unpack it and say, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? Because if it's a showstopper here, it could be somewhere else. And I reached out. I went beyond that one person that had given me that feedback and went to other people whose, I guess, views meant a lot to me and who had a good influence across, not just the business I was in, but in other businesses, to say, what do you think? And if that's the perception that I've given, what could I do about it? If this is such a critical concern, then how am I going to get around it? So I think sometimes if you don't agree with the feedback that you're getting, that's not to say that the feedback isn't correct, because the person giving you the feedback, that is their perception, that is their view. but it's what do you choose to do with it? And I went away and as I say, I sought, more feedback, and then I found a way around it. And actually then I was able to continue my career. Now I could have taken that feedback on and gone, well, that's the end then. I just need to stay here. That's my job lot. I'm not going to be any more than a sort of a middle manager. So I'm thankful that I had other people that could give me that support. I guess, so my one bit of feedback to kind of summarize that is, if you get feedback you don't agree with, don't shoot it down, but go and seek more. But also, if the feedback is right, there's got to be a way of unpacking it. It can't be the end. Or it might be you have to just change slightly or go in slightly different direction to be able to get to where you need to get to. So first of all, don't let that happen, because that has happened during my career and it could have gone quite a different way. And there's people out there that, are massive advocates of mine, and actually being able to lean on them and get their support and their development was really great. The next one that I've learned along the way from some of those examples that I've given you is that sometimes it's not always obvious. So there might be a job. So you said, would I have applied for that job at Fountains had I known that, all of that was going to happen in terms of administration, etc.? Or no, I wouldn't. However, if that hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have ended up where I ended up at Speedy. So sometimes the obvious no's, just stop and have a think to say, okay, whilst this job on the face of it isn't something I wouldn't normally apply for, I don't really know why they're approaching me about it, actually just stop and think. It could open up a different avenue that you've never thought of exploring before. So that's the other one. There could be one regret I have in my career, and I'm not going to say whether it is or it isn't, because I don't know, because I didn't choose to walk through this particular door. But there's been a number of both managing directors, CEOs, and CFOs that have all tried to convince me along my career to become an operational leader. So either to become an MD or to become a CEO or even to be a sales director. And I think that I go all the way back to my Tesco days, be a store manager, be a stores director. But because I was a very operational leader, people saw me as being well-rounded. So I could have done any of those roles, but I always remained in HR. So I don't regret always remaining in HR, because I've loved my career and there isn't any job I would change. However, I do sometimes wonder, that parallel universe stuff. If I had become a store manager, or if I had become an MD or a sales director, what would I be doing today? Or should I have given it a go just to shake it up a bit? And actually, maybe I would have loved it, maybe I wouldn't, but at least I'd be sitting here today saying, yeah, I gave it a go, but I didn't really enjoy it. And my boss today would say to you, he always says, if we worked together 10 years ago, you'd have been in an operational role, because he sees me as having that leaning. But yeah, so I think really always reflect what somebody's putting in front of you, reflect on it, because I think sometimes we take our decisions too quickly.
Yeah, that's, 3 great bits of advice there, Ellie, and so true. You never know what's around the corner, and you never know what a role could present. And sometimes by throwing yourself in, you get results that you probably didn't necessarily think you might get. So really great advice. And that's a really great way to finish the podcast today. So from Natasha and I, Ellie, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a truly inspirational story, hearing about your career, about your growth, about the opportunities that are presented, and how you manage yourself and your family through that. So I really thank you for joining us. I'm sure everybody has enjoyed watching the podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, there's more to come and more inspirational people that we're having on. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel below. But it leaves me just to say thank you again, Ellie. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you, Ellie.
My pleasure.